I have, throughout the course of this, um, thanked the different ones that come and help and certainly do that. And I've mentioned my wife a few times, and that she was doing the songs for us and advancing those, and is never more obvious than tonight when she's not here, and I forgot the advance the slides, and so I had one job. Well, besides teaching, but I had one job as far as that goes to fill in for her, and I didn't do that. Sorry, Aim, and everybody else. But anyway, we got it figured out. A little late. If there's one verse of sweet hour of prayer that about everybody knows, it's that first verse. So it wasn't as bad for the later verses. But anyway, we got it together eventually. So I just got to remember to take this clicker with me when I leave the pulpit tonight. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 37, and we're going to talk tonight about Joseph, but I'm not going to cover all of Joseph tonight. We're going to look at the life of Joseph probably over tonight and Wednesday and next Sunday night at least. It'll be 3 lessons at least, and maybe a 4th one. We'll just see how far we go. Tonight we will only look at chapter 37 as far as Joseph's life goes. On Wednesday, we will try to look at 39 and 40. So if you want to read ahead, 39 and 40 before Wednesday night. But we're going to look at Joseph and his life. I also want to include a little bit of what we do in our younger classes. The smallest classes, the 2 and 3-year-olds and 4 and 5-year-olds, very recently went through Joseph and the life of Joseph. And they use these flip charts. So Kevin said he was going to come in close on my nose. So I'll hold this in front of my face. But if you want to close in on the flip chart that I have, we have one of our younger people here tonight. Jared Knight is going to lead our closing prayer. Well, Ellie said that she's tired of watching church on TV. She wanted to come. So Ellie's with us here tonight. And so I showed Ellie this flip chart. And I said, who is that person? She knew right off who that was. She knows that this is a picture of Joseph with his multicolored coat. And so, clearly, she knew that, didn't have to be prompted, knew that picture. And so this is one of the things that the young people look at. And on the back it has, a little cheater thing on here, and I'll read that. It says, Jacob had 12 sons, but he loved Joseph the most, and even gave Joseph a very colorful coat. Joseph's brothers were jealous, and that's what we're going to look at here in just a couple minutes. So we've got a couple more of these we're going to look at, and I'll bring them up. I want to try to engage the children, so if you have a child that's in the 2 and 3 and 4 and 5-year-old class, we'll look at a couple of those other charts here in a little while as we get a little further into our study. As we've been doing each time, certainly people are welcome to make comments about what we're doing and questions, and certainly we can do that. So anyway, let's look in 37 verse 1. It says, Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now some of his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, and of course the oldest of the sons of Jacob, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, they were all of Leah. But some of the ones in the middle, the brothers there in the middle of the genealogy, were from the handmaids of Bilhah and Zilpah, the 2 handmaids of Rachel and Leah. And so they had several of those children in between, some of those sons. So they were some of the middle sons of Jacob's. And they were working in the flocks or taking care of the flocks along with Joseph. And Joseph brings a bad report about them. Doesn't say what they were doing, but simply went and told about them and what they were doing. And so we don't know whether this was a true report, that they were doing something bad, or that he perceived that they were doing something bad, or he was just kind of tattling on them. We don't really know. But whatever it is, he tells his father that his brothers are not doing what they ought to be doing. My guess is, knowing what we know about Joseph, that it was probably true. My guess is it was, because we don't see anything of any kind of deceit. We don't see anything of any kind of wickedness in the life of Joseph. In fact, when you look from here in chapter 37 all the way through 50, there's really nothing negative written about Joseph. There are very few characters in Scripture that you have about 10 chapters written about them. Not all the chapters are about Joseph, but the majority of that section from 37 through 50 is about him, and not one negative thing written about him. Not one time that he sinned, not one time that he lied or anything like that. Now, was Joseph perfect? No, of course not. But we don't see anything in Scripture. You know, you can't even say that about Abraham. You can't say that about Jacob. You can't say that about Isaac. You can't say that about David and many, many other characters in Scripture. There's about always something you can find that they did that was wrong that we have recorded. And so Joseph brings this bad report to his father, and of course that immediately alienates him and those brothers. They don't like him for that. But also in verse 3, and this was the chart picture that we just looked at. Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. And so he gave this robe. You know, when you've got 12 sons, you don't just give one robe to one of the sons. You know, we've got a lot of young adults that are having children. Let me tell you, the worst thing you could do is pick favorites of your kids and try to treat them in such a way that you are showing that one is a favorite. You may not be able to treat your children all the same because they're unique. Children are unique. You might have to treat them uniquely, but you've got to love them equally. You've got to love them the same. And so, you know, Jacob is making a huge mistake by giving his one son this multicolored or variated coat. You know, the Hebrew there for the coat of many colors or whatever is a little bit questionable. We don't know exactly what that means. It usually is translated many colors. It could also be of many types or variations. If you remember when Jacob was working for Laban, his father-in-law, remember the way his wages kept getting changed? And the majority of the sheep and the goats that he ended up with were all the speckled and whatever ones. And it may be the reason why the coat was so variated is it didn't have any wool. It was one color. You know, it could very well be that that's the only kind they had. It may have been a different patchwork because of all the spotted and striped and whatever, that it was a very different situation because he didn't end up with all the ones that were one color or the ones that were that way. And so it's possible that the reason for the variations in the colors might well be that's the only kind of wool they had in their flock because of that. I don't know. But anyway, this is a special coat that he made only one of and gave to his one son. And so picking favorites with the one son was definitely not a good idea. But you know, looking at it from a taking a step back position, I mean, Joseph is the one. He is the one of his sons that was going to be the chosen one. He was the one that was going to be the leader of the bunch. But the way Jacob went about that was certainly not the way to do that. Well, verse 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all their brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. You know, you might think if you're Jacob that you're doing your son a favor by giving him such a nice coat. But you know what you're doing? You're making it harder for him. Because he, after all, is one of 12 brothers. And the 10 oldest ones are going to hate him and dislike him because of this. So much to the point that they're not able to speak to him civilly, that they aren't able to work with him. And it'd be bad enough if you couldn't get along with one brother or two, but if you couldn't get along with 10 brothers, that you talk about a miserable existence. To have 10 older brothers and not a one of them cares a thing for you. That'd be tough, wouldn't it? To be able to live in that situation in which that was the case. The only brother that was younger than Joseph was Benjamin. Benjamin was very young at the time. In fact, you read from previous chapters that Rachel, Benjamin's and Joseph's mother, died giving birth to Benjamin. And so, yes, because Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, and then the handmaids made Joseph and Benjamin his two favorite sons, but that was a bad idea. And of course, if you ever needed reason to understand why polygamy was a bad idea, just read the story of the life of Jacob. The messes. When God allowed it in the Old Testament, and you look at it, you see it in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You see it in some of the kings, and every single instance you see it. There's no end of trouble. In fact, generally, the biggest problems and difficulties in the lives of the people you're talking about is all related to the multiple marriages and therefore the children that resulted and all the difficulties and challenges there with that. And so certainly it was a mess and showed that to be the case. And so they hated him and did not want to speak peacefully to him and could not do that. So here he is. He's got a bad situation in which his brothers don't care about him and are against him. And so Joseph in verse 5, now Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. Well, they already hate him. And then he tells them he has this dream, and he shares this dream with them. And all it does is incite more anger with them toward him. And he said to them, hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field. And behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us? And they hated him even more for his dreams and his words. And so we have here the flip chart, and we have that. Of course, that's what this shows. And talks about that, about the dreams that Joseph had. And of course, certainly this is one of the things that made Joseph special, is the fact that God spoke to him through dreams and gave him the things that were going to be. And so this dream of he and his brothers were all out in the field, and they were working the field, and they were all binding up their own sheath, and they were putting this together, and his sheath stood up, and the ones of his brothers all bent down and pointed toward his, like they were bowing down to it. And so he tells this to his brothers. He maybe at the time didn't understand what all that meant, but he's pointing that out to them. And so he does that. And so in doing that, he shows them that, and they don't like it. Are you going to reign over us? And in verse 9, there's a second dream. And, of course, the chart that I just showed you has both of those dreams pictured on it. And we'll look at it again here in just a moment. It says, then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, behold, I have dreamed another dream. And behold, the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the saying in mind. Now, like we said just a moment ago on the chart that is there, that it has the sheaves, and it also has the sun and moon and all the stars. And the sun and moon and all the stars bow down to the one star that was Joseph. And so they do that. And of course, the point of all of those is that his brothers, and yes, even his mother and his father, are going to bow down. Now, it's not literally his mother as in Rachel, because she's gone. She's deceased. But the others, the ones that are there that are his family. And so all of them are going to bow down. And even Jacob gets upset this time. And Jacob says, "Are we, your family, even your father, or am I going to bow down before you?" And Joseph said, yes, that was the case. And the brothers became even angrier. They became jealous. They became envious of him. And the father, Jacob, kept those things in mind. You know what that reminds me of is that statement made about Jacob, that he kept this saying in his heart or in his mind. It reminds me of Mary, doesn't it? Remember what we looked at last week when we talked about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and that she treasured the things that Jesus said in her heart, or the things that he said in the temple when he was found there studying with the religious leaders. And then also when the shepherds came and they said that they had come because the angels had come to them. And it says about her that she treasured those things in her heart. I think there's a little bit of that here in what Jacob's saying. Jacob put this in his mind and he thought, he pondered it. Because, you see, Jacob had a dream too. Do you remember Jacob having a dream? Jacob had a dream. And so let's go back to Jacob's dream. Jacob's dream is in chapter 28. In verse 10, 28 verse 10. Jacob is fleeing from his father's house. This is right after he and his mother had deceived his father Isaac. And they had tricked their father Isaac into giving him a blessing that should have been for his brother Esau. It's when they killed the young goat and they prepared the meat, said it was venison, and put the goat hairs on his arms and deceived his father, who was nearly blind at the time, and deceived him and received the blessing that was supposed to be for the oldest son, Esau. So therefore, Jacob ended up, not only because Esau had sold the birthright, but because he also stole the blessing, had taken everything from his brother, and even though he was the one born secondly. But here in verse 10, and he's on his way to Haran to go see his uncle, to meet with his uncle, and then eventually while he's there to marry Rachel and Leah. He is going there, but he has a dream on the way. Verse 10, Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of that place and putting it under his head, and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, was a ladder set up on the earth, and on top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and shall spread abroad to the west and the east and the north and the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed, Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." So in the morning Jacob took the stone that he put under his head and set it for a pillar and poured oil on top of it and called the name of the place Bethel. But the name of the city was Luz at the first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I may come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone that I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you have given me, I will give a tenth to you." He names this place Bethel. Bethel means house of God. And, of course, that's what he said. He called this place the house of God. He says, and I just love what he says there in verse 16, that God is in this place and I didn't know it. That, here it was that God was with him and he didn't understand that. Hopefully, thankfully, we can know that God is with us. And what an interesting thing that is. I wonder if the reason why Jacob took pause, even though he didn't like the interpretation of the dream, and it at first upset him, I wonder if he had to think, now wait a second. I remember back as a young man, there was a night that I had a dream. And he wondered maybe, just maybe, I think that Joseph's dream could be like that other dream. And so that could be what he was thinking. So here you have Jacob had a dream as a young man, and now you have Joseph having a dream as a young man. And his dream is about the fact that his family, his parents, his brothers are all going to bow down in front of him and be subject to him. Now, we know the rest of the story, don't we? We know how it turns out. We know how this story ends. And when we come to the end of the book, we find out that's exactly what happens. And so you look at how this dream is not only just a dream, it's prophetic. And it comes true at the end of the book and toward the end of Joseph's life. And so you've got to think that when Joseph finds himself in difficult circumstances, and they're going to get difficult, he's got to remember what God showed him, the dreams that he had, and that those dreams were true, that someday, somehow, it was going to come about that he was going to have his moment, to be able to stand tall, to be able to lead, to be able to do what God had wanted for him and called him to do. Even though it was going to get tough, because he's going to be a slave, he's going to end up being in prison, and it's going to take a lot of years for this to take place and this event to come through. Now, what about us? Certainly, we're not going to have such miraculous or prophetic dreams that are going to come to us. And certainly the situation for us is not ever going to be identical to Joseph, but God has made a lot of promises to us, hasn't he? Maybe if not by dreams, but God has promised us a lot of things. If you listen to my sermon this morning, you will notice in Ephesians chapter 3, God has made through Paul a lot of great promises about his help, about his willingness to be with us, about his Spirit being with us, about his Son being with us, and that he's able to do more than we ask or think, and that his power is at work in us, and all of those great and precious promises that we see there, that we see in Romans 8, that we see in all throughout the gospel accounts. We have all kinds of promises that God's made. They might not be as exciting in a way as a dream, or they may not be as individually targeted like a dream, but we have lots and lots of things that have been told to us that are going to happen to us and for us on our behalf in a good way if we stay faithful to our God. And so, just because we maybe don't have any miraculous kind of dreams or prophetic dreams like Joseph, holding on through difficult circumstances, through temptation, through hard times in life, and staying true and staying faithful to the Lord, we have every reason to do that like Joseph did. In fact, Joseph had, even though he had those dreams, he had a lot less evidence about God's help and God's protection than we do. We have a lot more than that. So we should have strength like Joseph had. We should have faith like Joseph had. And we should hold true like Joseph did. And so, because we can know the things that God has in store for us. And so with that, we can look toward the future. Joseph had those two dreams. He demonstrated to his family that those meant that one day they would bow down to him. Now, you have this simmering hatred that his brothers have. And it is going to boil over. Because a little later on, verse 12, now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now and see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" He says, "I am seeking my brothers." He said, "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock?" And the man said, "They've gone away. For I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. And he saw them from afar. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. So these brothers have hated him, and you know, sometimes brothers fight, and they say to each other, "I hate you," or "I'm going to kill you," and sometimes that's a lot of bluster, and nothing really ever comes of it. And they say harsh words, and they say unkind words. Very, very few brothers actually go through with it. Very few do that. But these brothers dislike him so much, hate him so much, that they're willing to kill him. And they begin to plot. They say to one another in verse 19, "Here comes the dreamer. Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." They thought, we'll fix him, we'll get rid of him, and we'll get rid of those dreams. They said, "We'll kill him and throw him in a pit." And so that's what they decided to do. That was their plan. They were going to kill him, throw him into a pit, and say that the wild animal had done this. But verse 21, but when Reuben heard it, Reuben was the oldest of the sons, the firstborn of all of Jacob's sons, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to him, "Shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." Okay, well, let's throw him in the pit, but let's keep him alive. Throw him in the pit. Let's scare the life out of him, and throw him in this pit. And so Reuben, being the oldest, has the most level head of the bunch. Now, he didn't like his brother. He would have stood up for him more. But he said, let's just throw him in the pit and let's do this. And Reuben said, let's don't shed his blood. Throw him in this pit and don't lay hand on him. Now, he did this at the end of verse 22 so that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father. Now, Reuben didn't want to kill him. Reuben wanted to return him, largely because Reuben, I believe, understood that he was the oldest and he would be the one in control. And he would be the one with the most at stake in all of this. And so he did not want to do that. And so he got them to throw him into the pit and said that, we'll let him stay there. And then he had in mind that he was going to pull him out and take him back to his father. And said so in verse 23. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him in the pit. The pit was empty, and there was no water in it. So they throw him in the empty pit. And of course, the young people, the children, have the picture in their thing about him being thrown into the pit and what this is, and that they put him in there and stick him in that pit. And so here he is in the bottom of this pit. And so they've left him there, and they sit down to eat. In verse 25, they look up and they see a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. What do they see? Cousins. Cousins. They're Ishmaelites, they're called, but why do I call them cousins? Well, what's that? Yeah, their great uncle was Lot, the nephew of Abraham. And so, the great grandfather of these 12 sons is Abraham. And Abraham's nephew was Lot. And so these Ishmaelite traders were likely, third, fourth, fifth cousins. They're quasi-family. Because being descended from Ishmael being the son of, they're not from Lot, they're from Abraham. They're from, Abraham had a son named Ishmael as well as that. So these individuals would be cousins of these men. So these are probably third cousins, would be my guess. Because, Abraham had Ishmael and had Isaac, and Isaac was their grandfather, and so Ishmael was their grandfather's brother. So Ishmael was their great uncle. And so these guys would be cousins to these men. So not only are they just Ishmaelite traders, that's usually the answer to the trivia question, but they're cousins. They're family and aren't too far away. Third, maybe fourth cousins at the very most, because they share Abraham as an ancestor. And so here they come along, and the brothers say that they're going down from Gilead. They're taking their camels. They've got gum and balm and myrrh, and on their way to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother and our own flesh. And besides, we can't get anything out of him if he's dead. Let's make a little money." And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders, also called the Ishmaelite traders, passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. So they sell him to his cousins, the Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael, and he goes down to Egypt. And so they make 20 pieces of silver out of him, And so they get that. I'm not sure how they divided 20 pieces of silver. I mean, after all, well, I guess you would. There would be 10 of them because Benjamin wasn't with them, so they all got 2 pieces, I guess you could say. So they have those pieces of silver, so they got a little bit out of them. So they take him and send him off to Egypt. Verse 29, when Reuben returned to the pit, they saw Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and I, where shall I go?" Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood and sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." Do you notice the deception in that? Do you notice it? They didn't say, "We saw him dead." They just said, "Tell us, is this his robe?" Well, they knew it's his robe because they took it off of him. But do you notice they don't straight up lie? You know, there's some real deception. They don't straight up lie. Say, "Jacob, tell us, is this Joseph's coat?" Look, verse 33. He identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him." That's Jacob speaking, okay? Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. You see, Jacob's mind jumped to the conclusion. You see, they probably thought, well, we're not going to lie to him. They took the blood, they put it on the coat, and they bring it to their father and say, Is this Joseph's? And Jacob jumps to the conclusion that yes, obviously it is. Yes, how did this blood get on there? Apparently a fierce animal has attacked him and killed him, torn him to pieces. You know, if they ever needed DNA evidence in the Bible, it'd have been good right there, wouldn't it? You know, spread a little luminol on that, and they'd know that wasn't human blood. You know, like the show on the television show, like the show on the cop shows. They spray out luminol. They do the dark light, and they spray the luminol. Though it's human blood or it's blood of an animal. Well, they didn't have that, and so they had no way of knowing that this was a goat's blood that was here. And so he did that. He went to that belief. Then verse 34, then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. And so here he believed that his son was dead, believed that he was gone. And could you imagine all of the awkward silence and all of the awkward moments and all the back questioning that all these brothers would have had and the things that they would have said about their conspiracy and all of that? You know, deservedly so. But I guarantee you they suffered because of what they did. Because they saw their father's grief. And they saw how their father hurt. And they saw how their father mourned. And they knew the truth. They knew what they had done. And, you know, here they had done this terrible thing. And undoubtedly it would have hurt them. And they deserved every bit of it. They deserved any bit of anxiety, every bit of pain that it caused them. But just think about what they had done. And certainly it is a great thing to show about the pain and anguish that comes when we try to deceive others. And of course they did that. But because of that, you know, the next piece of the story comes along, that those traders took him down to Egypt and they sold him to a man named Potiphar. And he was the captain of the guard in Pharaoh's court. And so the story goes on. And we'll look Wednesday night at chapters 39 and 40. Chapter 38 is not about Joseph. It's about one of Jacob's other sons, Judah, and something he did. Not a very nice story, but another cautionary tale on some other things. But we're not going to talk about Judah. We're going to talk about Joseph. If you want to read that, by all means do it. But we'll not do it in this study. And LOL. Craig Dutton sends me a comment for the end of the class. Don't be like Jacob and his family and forget about Joseph. Similarly, don't forget the clicker for the songs. Got it. Anyway, but yeah, very true. But yeah, we certainly need to be like Joseph was, but not like his family, and certainly need to serve him. Want to say to you, have a good week, and be well, everybody. Hang in there. 2 weeks from today, we can be back together, or at least hopefully most of us can. So keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully our cases are all gone in Marion County. We haven't really had any cases in the last couple weeks, and hopefully that'll happen and stay that way so that we can be able to be together and be able to worship God together. So we're going to sing our one more song, and then Jared's going to lead us in closing prayer, and we'll be dismissed. Have a good week, everybody.